Good afternoon. Welcome back to another session on my second channel, and that is the Andrew Tucker TV channel. This is my second channel, ladies and gentlemen. You can also go ahead and subscribe to my two other channels, Rumination with Andrew, that is Rumination with Andrew, and also Caribbean and Latin American News Now. That's my third channel. My first channel is Rumination with Andrew. Second channel is this advertising the channel, and I'm asking you to like and to subscribe and to support all channels. Very important that you do that. I have loads of political commentaries, biting, incisive political commentaries that I'm sure that you will not like to miss. Okay, so please go ahead and subscribe and support all major channels, all three channels, that is. Okay, so today we are going to look at Jamaica's silence or Jamaica's silent Jamaica is silent on Palestine genocide. Belize and Barbados take a stance or take a stand. As the genocide in Palestine continues, Caribbean nations are being forced to choose between silence and principle, while Belize and Barbados have taken strong stances against Israel's actions. Jamaica remains silent, raising questions about the country's foreign policy and moral compass. Why is Jamaica refusing to speak out while its neighbors show leadership? Is this silence a result of US pressure, political convenience, or lack of conviction? In this video, we examine the divide within the Caribbean, the role of international diplomacy, and why Jamaica's position on Palestine matters for its credibility on the world stage. While Barbados and Belize are standing up for Palestine, Jamaica is staying silent. But why? Is it fair, politics, or just a lack of principle? Today, we are going to expose the truth behind Jamaica's foreign policy. Very important that you understand that. Now, the Wired Jamaica, that is a paper online, Wired JA, that's what they call it. You can go there and subscribe to their paper, their online paper. And this is coming out of Montego Bay, Jamaica. And this article was actually written on July 6, 2025, so it's quite recent. More than 40 Caribbean civil society organizations have issued an unprecedented demand for CARICOM to call for international arms embargoes and urge member states to suspend diplomatic relations with Israel, placing enormous pressure on Jamaica as the regional bloc's new chair. We must understand that currently Dr. Andrew Michael Holness is currently the chairperson, the chairman of CARICOM. But behind closed doors at Jamaica House, Prime Minister Andrew Holness faces an uncomfortable truth. His government's $4 billion cybersecurity contract with Israeli defense contractor ELTA, that's ELTA, Systems and Extensive Intelligence Sharing Agreements, have fundamentally compromised Jamaica's ability to respond to these calls for moral leadership on Gaza. So this is why. This is exactly why he's not able to take, or Jamaica is not able to take a moral stance as far as the genocide in the Gaza area is concerned. Because his government's for Jamaica, that's $4 billion Jamaican dollars cybersecurity contract with Israeli defense contractor Elbit Systems. So having had that contract signed, it's very difficult for Jamaica now to take a stand, a moral stand against what is happening in Palestine. The civil society coalition, spanning from Jamaica's Left Alliance for National Democracy and Socialism to regional organizations across the Caribbean, has demanded that CARICOM leaders advocate for international legal proceedings against Israel at the International Court of Justice and cut all ties with the Israeli rogue state. Their open letter, timed for Jamaica's assumption of the CARICOM chairmanship for 6 months in July 2025, represents the most coordinated Caribbean pressure campaign, sorry, not pleasure, but pressure campaign since the anti-apartheid movement against South Africa. Now, we must remember that Jamaica has always taken, for the most part, principled, you know, actions, decisions as far as injustices in the world are concerned. Remember that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did say that injustice anywhere is a form of, injustice everywhere. So it means, therefore, that if one people, as we're seeing in the set, a group of people is the recipient of injustice, it means, therefore, that that injustice will be exported to other peoples. And that is what we have to understand. Today, it's the Palestinians. Tomorrow, it might be Jamaicans. Tomorrow, it might be Venezuelans. It might be, Trinidadians. So it's very important that we begin to understand that we can't sit quietly and watch the sort of brutality that we're seeing occurring in that area in Gaza. Very important that we understand these things, these matters. So Jamaica is silent because it has signed a $4 billion Jamaican dollars contract with Israel's or Israeli cybersecurity contractors. Now, there was an article written here in the Guardian newspaper, the UK Guardian newspaper. It says that Jamaica was never afraid to stand on the side of justice. Silence on Gaza shames us. And this was written by Kenneth Mohammed. Not sure if he's Jamaican, perhaps he is. In not speaking out, the government has broken with a proud Caribbean history of condemning human rights violations. For Jamaicans, the absence of the country's representative at last week's UN General Assembly vote on a call for humanitarian truce in the Israel-Hamas war was more than just an embarrassing political effort to walk between raindrops, as one government critic put it. It was shameful. Now, I must say that this article was written in 2023. So it's not recent. It's not the recently held General Assembly. That's the United Nations General Assembly, which, Jamaica was also criticized for not walking out, as many other countries did, when Bibi Netanyahu stood up to make his speech. We were actually, some journalists and the PNP in particular, the People's National Party in Jamaica, which is the opposition party, challenged the government about not walking out to show solidarity against what Netanyahu and his country are actually doing in Gaza to the Palestinians. In the annals of international diplomatic history, Jamaica's decision on apartheid in July 1959 was a pivotal movement. Prior to this, the world had witnessed India's efforts at the UN to condemn South Africa for its racist treatment of Indians in 1946 to 1947, before the country descended into the era of legally defined apartheid. But it was not until more than a decade later that Jamaica became the first nation to initiate sanctions against South Africa. The response from the South African government was volcanic. They decried the move as a blatant intrusion into their sovereignty, urging the British colonial power to intervene and quash Jamaica's audacity. The South African authorities were not merely angered, they were deeply apprehensive that Jamaica's action might set in motion a ripple effect of sanctions imposed by other countries. Jamaica, a member of the West Indies Federation since 1958, had the potential to spark a political chain reaction across the British Caribbean. The Jamaican government's decision was far from impulsive. The implementation of trade sanctions against South Africa had been a topic of intense discourse within ruling People's National Party and among cabinet ministers for nearly 2 years before its public announcement in 1959. Nurtured within the echelons of government, it was a cogent decision bearing witness to the imperatives of justice. As the then Jamaican Chief Minister Norman Manley explained, and I quote, "The ban on trade with South Africa is a logical and proper act done in respect of a country which denies to its citizens, its own people, all the basic human rights and denies to colored people all over the world every right of human rights intercourse. Since we cannot send a colored athlete to South Africa, not even a cricket team, with any pretense of dignity, why should we send our goods?" Unquote. And this was a quote from former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Norman Washington Manley. Jamaica has never been a country to shy away from controversy or been afraid to stand on the side of justice, regardless of the risk of being ostracized. After all, its greatest hero, Bob Marley, was a leading Caribbean figure to sing out against injustice and discrimination. So why have we now not taken a principled stance against what is happening in Gaza? Is it that the Israeli government is controlling us, or because their connection to the United States, and we are afraid of the punches that the United States can actually inflict upon us, right? So we are not really courageous enough to take a moral stance. But I'm sure that Norman Washington Manley, but we can't perhaps compare Norman Washington Manley to what is happening today, because at that time we were in the throes of the Cold War, and these two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, were contending for the mastery. And the United States emerged in 1989 as the winner of those two major superpowers. So we only have one superpower in the world, and that is why Jamaica is in a different sort of context than what Norman Washington Manley was in 1959. Very important that we understand that. But should we allow fair to govern our foreign policy stance, or should we take principled action? Why is Belize a smaller country than we are, and one which is not known internationally, globally, for its stance against injustice in the world? Why is she standing and Jamaica is sitting, right? Then Jamaica is actually concurring with what is happening, sits silently. And the fact that she has not spoken definitively, unequivocally against what is happening in the Gaza area signifies that she consents with what is happening there. Very important that we understand this sort of development, this sort of reasoning, this sort of logic. She is in full agreement with what is happening in the Gaza area. And this is something that we have to we have to reflect on. And I think the people of Jamaica need to have their voices heard. They need to say no to what is happening, and perhaps that should have been one of the major political platforms of the recently held government general elections that was held on September 3rd. But we were more about other things, about just the difference between green and orange. We weren't about the geopolitics and what is happening in the world and how these geopolitical crises are going to impact our standard of living, our social lives, or economic lives, in all facets of our lives. But we weren't thinking about these things. We were more enamored by what Dr. Andrew Holness is saying, or Olga G, and the gossips that surround them. That is what preoccupied our minds and our attention, and continue to do so. And I'm appalled at some of the things that we are actually publishing, and people are just viewing these nonsensical things. And then when all of these traumatic conditions begin to unfold upon us, we're going to find ourselves crying, not knowing that a political storm, a political volcano is brewing in the West and will envelop us, will sweep us up, will consume us, will swallow us, and we will be no more. Because what is happening in the Gaza area is unprecedented and should not be tolerated. But it seems to me that Jamaicans are more concerned about entertainment than what is happening on the global stage, and how these events will shape our economic, social, religious, and political future. These are things that we must ask ourselves, but we aren't asking ourselves these questions. So this is my topic for today, and I hope that you will let me know why you think that Jamaica is silent on the matter and why we haven't taken a principled stance. Now, let me just end here by saying that with, like what the PNP suggesting that we had to walk out, these, as as the foreign minister said, that is Kamina Johnson-Smith, that just walking out is not going to be much. Yes, it is a symbolic gesture. It's a symbolic gesture that we are in disagreement with what Netanyahu is doing there. However, we need a more principled stance. Economic sanctions. Perhaps we need to stop this cyber security arrangement agreement that we had with Israel. Should we? So that they can understand, because that is what we did in 1959 when we had economic sanctions under the Norman Russian Mandate's government. He imposed sanctions on South Africa under the terrible apartheid regime in South Africa. Why aren't we doing that? Have we changed? Have we sold our souls for 30 pieces of silver? Very important that we begin to ask these questions. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe, and make sure that you are interacting with the videos, you're liking them, and that you're sharing them with as many of your contacts so that we can explode on this channel and we can have more informed, more biting, more incisive political and social commentaries. See you in another one. Ciao.